The 1976 is the fifth of our Orcadian vintages that we have released. If you've seen the other videos or you've read about the other vintages we do, basically the difference between the 64 and 68 is wind. It's about the wind through the pagoda roof making one smoky and one not so smoky. 1970 is perfection for me. And then you have the 1971 and 1976. Now we brought these out at the same time, this being the 76. And the difference between the 71 and 76 is about wood. It's about the casks. The 1971 is about Spanish oak with a little bit of American oak, and the 71 is about American oak with a little bit of Spanish. What that does is a couple of things. Again, you'll see by the colour it's all of a sudden lighter. Even just visually it's easy to spot the difference. It's lighter than the 71. And that's because the American oak trees don't necessarily affect the colour as dramatically as Spanish oak. And when you turn the glass 45 degrees and spin it all the way around, what you'll see is a line of whisky that begins to appear, and that line of whisky shows little beads and pearls beginning to arrive, and they're very, very small. Tells you the alcohol content has jumped, and this is at 49.1% alcohol, and that extra 9% is really going to help with, again, flavour delivery to the palate. Then we nose the whisky. And where the 1971 jumped up your nose, this is a little bit more reserved. Again, it's the American oak influence that's doing that. But there is definitely the sweetness coming through at the back end. You know it's there. You definitely know there's Spanish casks involved at some point. It's very, very light. The smoke from the peat is beginning to come through. It's all about fresh fruit. It's very, very coconut, very nutty. But then behind it, arriving very, very late, is the sweetness. And that's the use of these Spanish oak Spanish oak sherry casks that just develop that sweet, rich, fruity flavour that comes through. That dry, smoky flavour characteristic of Highland Park is beginning to come through on the nose because the sweetness isn't hiding it. And then to taste it. All the smoke, all the sweetness, all the fruit, all of the fresh fruit, all arrives exactly at the same time, and it builds and builds and builds and builds until you have this wonderful cacophony of flavours happening, and then eventually it dies down slowly but surely in that dry, smoky aftertaste, which is just classic Highland Park. Hits you very, very late. And the wonderful thing about drinking old Highland Park is that you almost get all the flavours arriving at the same time, just in perfect unison, where you would drink a young one, you would get a sweetness first and then a smoky flavour at the end. When you drink something like this, you get the sweet and smoky flavour arriving exactly the same time, and it just develops in the palate, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and kind of builds to a crescendo, and then it just gently and gently begins to go quiet. It's an absolute jaw-droppingly good whisky, and depending on your palate will depend on whether you prefer the 71 or the 76, because they're two very, very different whiskies. Just another cracking whisky.